Oh, once that I knew I was going to leave home, I started feeling pretty cheerful, although I was worried about how my sisters would survive our troubled home. Margie knew she was going to have to go to Boulder for 2 more years following my departure because I was skipping a grade. I started paying a lot of attention to my little sisters, thinking I'd come home for the summer so they wouldn't feel like I'd abandoned them. I do recall, though, another really hard job of cowpunching I did that spring when I was 12, at my dad's request. Daddy said that some of the young heifers needed to be gathered from King Bench and brought home. They were not as good at foraging for food as the older cows. Well, I was very wary about going with Dad back down to King's Bench after I killed that heifer. When he said he hadn't been able to find anybody to go with him, I finally agreed to go. The very fact that he couldn't find a real cowboy to go in my stead was a warning. This was not going to be an easy job. We were going to have to drive the cattle all the way home, so we set out for King Bench at a pretty fast pace in the early morning. It was pretty cold, but I never even noticed the chill. I was too worried about how hard I was going to have to ride once we reached our destination. I done right to worry, because when we got to King's Bench, I could not believe what Daddy expected me to do. He told me that he started cutting out some of the young heifers who would be calving that spring, and they were all milling around in a bunch, and he told me I was to keep them together. And while he went out in the bushes and the trees and found more, he told me that I could have his horse, Charlie, and he'd take mine, because Charlie would be a big help in keeping the cattle together. Well, even though Charlie was a wonder horse, he could not possibly do the job all by himself. I was going to have to stick him and ride hell-bent for leather. That was the longest and the hardest few hours I ever spent cowpunching in my entire life. I thought Daddy would never stop cutting out poor heifers, which Charlie and I were expected to keep milling around in a circle, following him without losing any. Daddy did a lot of yelling and hollering, and Daddy and Charlie had to lunge here and lunge there every time a heifer threatened to break out with a herd and take off through the trees. And when one did manage to escape, Charlie took out after her, and brought her back with me hanging on to his horn, and him for dear life. I could see that Charlie had done this job before, but I had not. Charlie knew he had to get that little pesky heifer back under control instantly before the whole herd is scattered. My nerves were pretty well ripped before Daddy finally pulled up, and said he guessed he cut out all the peaked ones that needed to go home. As we headed back down the trail, those heifers were running so fast that I had trouble keeping up with them. I said, "These young cows acted pretty frisky to me. Why did he think they weren't doing well?" He told me to look at one heifer when we caught up with her. He said she was scared of people which was why she was running so fast. But she was so weak, she couldn't stop shaking. She probably hadn't been feeding well, he said, and she likely wouldn't have lived till spring and the roundup. I reflected that next winter I wouldn't even be there with my dad, so I'd better enjoy the last big cowpunching job I'd probably ever do with him in the late winter. Poor Dad, he'd been so patient with me up to now. Just when he deemed me experienced enough to be able to go do something hard with cattle on a horse, I was going a long way to school. I probably figured it was a good thing because I might get hurt doing some of the didos, the hard riding I'd had to do that day with Sarley. When Sarley rounded up a critter, he did it with such speed and authority that his rider was hard put not to come unseated. Some horses I'd ridden would act skittish if they hadn't been ridden for a while. You'd think they'd never even been near a cow. Their training tended to come undone like mine. We hadn't arrived back home at the ranch with the heifers until after dark. And Dad was satisfied that these young heifers would all stay alive and they'd have healthy calves. He'd come back once more, too, right then, from nearly dying of a poisonous substance he drank. A bottle of rub alcohol. Rub alcohol, if you can imagine. And he was acting like the great cowman he had it in him to be. And for the first time that day, I thought I had the right to be called a real cowgirl, daughter of one of the West's most skilled cowboys. Dad told Mother even in his youth he'd had a horse he taught to dance on its hind legs and do tricks, and he'd leap on horses without even touching the stirrup. He probably dreamed of being a circus rider when he was young. The King Cowboys owned a horse called Bally Rocket. I wrote a poem about my dad, Clyde Keene on Bally Rocket, in the days when a man and a horse were one.